Okay, welcome back. We're talking about the for loop. So what are the rules for the for loop? Ooh, your ears should perk up every single time where I say, what are the rules? Because you know I like rules when it comes to test questions. So basically, one of the rules is the loop control variable basically has to be a number. I mean, you can't have Fred, you know. So it's basically going to be numbers. The other one basically is, you know, at the time you've got this thing running, you know how many times it's going to run. And then the third rule is don't mess with the loop control variable. Since all of the loop control variable things happen on line 44, don't go in here and do something stupid. I mean, this is technically, this is correct, right? If I said if LCV is equal to 5, then LCV is equal to 7. All right, this is technically this is perfectly legal, technically, but don't do it. Okay, don't do it. Because that's the beauty of this guy, is that all of the loop control variable messing with occurs in one line. So don't mess with it someplace else, because other people coming behind you are thinking, oh, you're using a for loop, so everything I need to know about the loop control variable is right here on one line. Don't fool them by sneaking in something else. Now up here, I have no choice but to mess with the loop control variable for the while and the do while. I mean, I literally have no choice to have it inside the parentheses, right? But this guy, no way, don't do it. Okay, so those are the 3 rules for the for loop. Okay, so let's do a running total kind of a thing. This is something that happens in computer science a bunch. So let's just see, well, let me think about it a minute. So if I want to figure out like the sum of a bunch of numbers, like I'm entering up into a loop, first of all, you need to find out how many times it's going to run. That'd be one thing. Create a loop that'll run that many times. It doesn't really matter which loop type you have, really. Add the current value, and then after the loop, calculate the average. Okay, so I'm going to, just because this is kind of taking up a lot of screen space, I'm gonna get rid of some of this. Okay. All right, cool. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say something along the lines of, let's do system.out.print, enter the number of, I don't know, how about students or something. And again, I'm going to assume that nothing goes wrong here, so I'm going to say int num students is equal to integer dot parse int. You guys should have all this down, right? Keyboard. Ooh, I don't even have a keyboard yet. I'll have to fix that. Sorry about that. Next line. Okay. I forgot to build a keyboard scanner, so let me do that now. So that would be scanner keyboard is equal to new scanner system.in. And then of course I'll get the little red thing that says, hey man, you're missing some stuff. Like, okay, cool. All right, so now I know how many times. So I'm just going to use a for loop since I already know how many times it's going to run. So here goes. For int LCV is equal to 0. LCV is less than num students. And LCV plus plus. Now, you know why I did that like that? Right? Starting at 0, because that's the way we count up, but less than. So if there's 10 students, then I would go from 0 to 9. Okay, got it? Okay, good. So now I'm going to turn around and ask you for what the current score is. So this would be system.out print enter the score. Okay, and then I'm going to say int score is equal to integer. Oh, come on. Okay, why don't I just copy this? It'd be a lot easier for me struggling to spell it thing. Okay, now I have a score, but what I want to do is I want to add that onto a accumulator, so to speak. I need to accumulate the number of times. So I'm going to need something called sum. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a value just to start with. So now I have the score. So to do an average, I need to sum up all the items and then divide by the number of items, right? That makes sense, right? Okay, cool. So I'm just going to say sum, and almost, remember that plus equals guy? All that does is just accumulate the value. So every time you enter a score, it just puts it into sum. Okay, and that's it. I mean, other than a closing parentheses, curly brace here. Okay, so I'm going to ask for the number of students. Now that I know how many students, I'm just going to do a for loop that goes that many times. I'm entering the score, and then I get the sum. All right, so let's go here, and let's figure out what the average is. So I'm going to do a double because I want this to be a fractional part. And so this is going to be AVG score is equal to sum divided by num students. Doesn't that make sense? Okay, so then we're going to do system.out.println average is, and no formatting this time. Okay, let's run this. Okay, enter number of students. I want to make it easy. 5. So score, somebody made 100, somebody made a 90, somebody made an 88, how about a 98, and how about a 72? And the average is 89 exactly. Really? It's really an 89.00000000? Yeah, probably not. Here's what happened. When I did this integer division, it says that's an integer, an integer, therefore the result is going to be an integer, and then after I've got the result, I'm going to store it into a double. That is not what we want. So I need to promote one of these guys using the cast. Okay? So the cast is going to make one of them double, which will force the other one to become double. Then the math will happen at double, which includes the decimal points, and then it'll put it into the score. So let's run this one more time. Okay, I'm probably not going to pick the exact same numbers because I don't remember what I did. One of them was 100. One of them was a 90. I think that one was 89. I can't remember. 77 and 98. And now the answer is 90.8. Okay, now that I go along with. So did you see what I had to do to make this thing work with regard to giving my integer division something to do? Okay? Now, what if you say, well, I have no idea how many students are going to be in the class. And instead of asking you up front, why don't I just set it up so that you just continue adding stuff to it until I tell you to stop? Okay? So the continue until I tell you to stop is what's called a sentinel. And that's a cool word. A sentinel is, like a guard standing up front and making sure that everything's happening. So the sentinel is the one who says, stop or, continue. Cool? So when you don't know how many times the loop is going to run, but you know it's going to run at least once, which loop type would you pick? I don't know how many times, but I know it's going to happen at least once. That would be the do while, right? You guys are keeping all this stuff in your head, right? Because this is good test material. We have an entire section coming up here talking about how you go about picking the loop type. All right, so it's basically the steps are I create a sentinel, whatever that sentinel is. I create a counter variable. I create the loop. I prompt you for the whatever the score is. If it's the sentinel, then I do something different. If not, increment, move on. So I'm just going to do this over again, except this time, instead of prompting you for how many students there are, I'm just going to assume that you can figure it out on your own. So here's how it works. Okay, I'm going to start out, I'm just going to use the same variables over again. So I'm just going to set sum back to 0. Now before, I knew what the value for num students was because I asked you, okay, but I don't know what it is now. So I'm going to say num students equals 0 because I don't know yet. Okay, cool. All right. Oh, num students, plural. Thank you. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to be doing a do while loop, but I need something in here to let me know when to stop, what my sentinel is. And so the score is going to be that guy. Okay, now remember the scope here? Line 59 has got score in there, but I can't use score now because it's got the wrong indentation level, so its scope doesn't work for me here. So I'm going to go ahead and just do int score. Create me a brand new variable here. I'll go ahead and set it equal to 0 too, just for the heck of it. All right, so here's how it would work. It's going to be a do loop, and then I'm going to come back to that part and say do while score is not equal to a -1. -1 is going to be my sentinel. -1 is a special code that basically says, oops, we're done. All right, so here's how it would work. I'm going to grab an awful lot of this because I don't like typing. Oh, let's put the cursor in the right spot before we do that. What do you say? Okay, so I'm doing a system out, enter the score, except now I'm going to add a little text in here. I'm going to say something like, or -1 to quit. Okay? So enter a legitimate score or the sentinel value. Isn't that kind of cool? All right. And so the rest of it's going to be roughly the same. Now that I have the score, I'm going to say sum plus equals score. But since this guy doesn't know, and when I get my average, I'm going to have to know how many students there are. So up here, I didn't have to have a counter because I knew. But down here, I do have to have a counter. So not only do I have to add that in here, I also have to say num students plus plus. I have to have a counter now. All right, does that kind of sort of make sense? Okay, so then when we get to the end, let's do this over again. Again, just copying. All right, except I don't need to declare the variable since I already have it declared. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this guy. So I'm going to pick some very simple numbers. I'm just going to have 2 students. One made 100, the other made a 50. So it makes the math easy. You know the answer is going to be 75. So let's do it again. 100, 50, and then a -1 to quit. And the answer is 49.66666. What went wrong? Well, the problem is right here. The sentinel value was never intended to be part of the data. So I need some way of telling it don't do that. And so I'm just going to add an if statement in here that basically says, if score is not the sentinel value, which is the -1, then do the math. Otherwise, don't do the math, because the math is only applicable when you have legitimate data, not when you're dealing with the sentinel. I don't want the sentinel to be added to the rest of the stuff. Okay, that kind of makes sense? So now it'll say, oh, it'll only add the 50 and the 100. When it gets to the -1, it won't do that. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You know how this works.